Bautista. This will be so good. And welcome back to In the Can. We're here with filmmaker Rory Kennedy. We're going to be talking about Last Days in Vietnam. And a very special guest, Kim Do, is with us as well. And welcome back.
Thank you.
It's good to see you again. I think it was a couple of years ago you were here with Ethel.
Exactly.
Which did extraordinarily well and won all sorts of awards, and it was a beautiful, beautiful film.
Thank you.
And this film is nothing like it.
It's
a little different, but it kind of, it's right in your wheelhouse. I mean, you've been making films throughout your entire career that have had a very human story to them. You've talked about the human condition in big ways, and Last Days in Vietnam, I don't think there's a better way to preface that film. What got you interested in this project, and tell us a little bit about the premise?
Well, Mark Samuels at American Experience had approached me with this idea to do a film about the last days in Vietnam, and I was instantly very interested in the subject matter. But then when I kind of dug into the stories and discovered this angle that really had not been told before of all the people who were on the ground during those last very frantic days, the Americans who went against U.S. policy to try to save as many of the South Vietnamese as possible. And that story really hasn't been told, and it's an extraordinary story of heroism, people on the ground who did really extraordinary things.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's a story that really hasn't been even mentioned because, yes, I mean, you can imagine in the last days of the war, you know, from the American standpoint, let's just get our people out, right? And
right.
they were instructed to just get out, leave everything behind, don't look up,
yes.
just go. Yet at the same time, you're talking about some very special people who thought out of the box, so to speak, and realized there was more to do.
Yeah, well, the North came in much faster than
right.
we expected, and the U.S. was largely out of the country at that point, so there was a handful of diplomats who were still there in 1975, so they really were focusing on, you know, we only have a few days here to get these folks out, we got to get as many people out as possible, and
right.
ended up having to focus on the Americans. But the people on the ground, and you know, one of the things about that war is that they had such tight relationships, the Americans and the Vietnamese, and they had families together, and they had deep relationships and connections and friendships. And so, and because the North had a reputation of really doing horrific things, they knew if they left them behind, many of them would be killed, many of them would be tortured, many of them would be left in concentration camps, re-education camps. And so there was a lot at stake, and they did everything in their power to get as many folks out as possible.
Yeah, well, it's a super cool story, and we have kind of living proof of that
yes,
story here with us today with Kim. Welcome.
Thank you.
So talk about your experience with this. Was it a story that you thought would ever be told, first of all?
Well, it's a long story.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a long story, but just a few words about the end of Vietnam. And at that time, the situation was desperate. There's no more fighting, if you want to say. Fighting for what now? Because the country, President Thieu had left the country, and the whole thing was in shambles. So from the Navy standpoint, we tried to do our duty to the last moment, but it's very desperate. But at that time, at the end, one of my friends, Mr. Richard Armitage, came and see me, and he told me that we need you to bring the big ship out. So I was very happy because that was the last chance, the last opportunity for the Vietnamese Navy to escape from capture and imprisonment and even destruction. So we make a plan to get all the ship out. So parallelly to the Operation Frequent Wind from the United States side, to pick up all the U.S. personnel out of Saigon at the last day. Now we have our own operation to take out some 30,000 people. Wow. With 32 ships.
Wow.
And with virtually no incident or death at all. It's very well organized. So we just use this opportunity to, when we get approached by Ms. Rory to talk about the movie, about the end of Vietnam, I thought that it is a good opportunity for me to revive that last episode of my country. At the same time, to say a few words, if not glorifying the U.S. Navy and also the Vietnamese Navy, what we did at that time.
Well, it's such a wonderful story because, you know, Richard Armitage had approached Kim Do and said, we've got to get all of these ships out so they don't fall into the hands of the North.
Right.
And so Kim Do said, yes, 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 we'll do that. And then he mentioned sort of offhandedly, you know, there's going to be a few soldiers on those ships and military men. And so Richard Armitage was dead silent when he heard that. And then they had this meeting place at Con Son Island. So they came to Con Son Island in the middle, you know, it was April 30th and everything was falling apart. And they went around the corner and saw these ships and they were packed to the gill. And it's some of the most extraordinary footage because, you know, you see a ship that's supposed to have 200 people on it, there's 2,000 people on it. And it's all these people. And so then they debated, well, what do we do now? And Richard Armitage said, you know, let's take them to the Philippines. And just showed up there and, you know, saved 30,000 people. And, you know, everybody was a little shocked when they got there. But it's an extraordinary story.
It certainly is. I mean, what an extraordinary mix of perspectives, too. You know, from the military standpoint, let's just shave the ships. We don't want the enemy to have the ships.
Right.
Oh, by the way, there's people involved.
Yeah.
Oh, hadn't even thought of that. You know what I mean?
Know.
And now what do we do?
And from the Vietnamese standpoint, I told him that if we need a sailor on board, but you know that the Vietnamese sailor would not leave without their family.
Right.
So with their family, that means some civilian.
Wow.
And with some civilian, that means friend and relative of those people. That's why from my point of view, I try to get maximum of people on board the ship.
Sure.
That's why we get more than 30,000 people.
I mean, they single-handedly saved 30,000
people. And nobody
people.
thought about that. And even Armitage, you know, he was...
And then Armitage, you know, I said, well, did you get approval from Washington? He said, you know, I think I'd rather ask forgiveness than approval.
That's a good way to put it. Well, I think we actually do have a clip of the film, and so I would love people to get kind of a view of your work, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. Here's a quick look at Last Days in Vietnam.
Went through the gate post. I saluted in uniform as a captain of the United States Army. The guard waved me through, and I drove straight out to the flight line to an aircraft that was awaiting. One Vietnamese colonel that was putting his family on the plane, he had wanted to stay in Vietnam to defend the country. And this full colonel had like 8 kids and a wife. And he was in tears, the family. The family were in tears. And I said to him, get on the plane, just go. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible moral dilemma for everybody.
You know, and I can't imagine the experiences as you went from subject to subject and met some new and interesting people. You know, what was it like for that? Well, first of all, for you to hear this story, maybe for the first time in such a context, but at the same time, obviously some memories are coming up, and people are talking about this, maybe for the first time in decades.
It's true. It's true. It was a very intense interviewing process, and you know, a number of the people, I spoke to them after we did the interview, and sometimes these interviews would last 2 or 3 hours going through and really remembering every detail of what happened, and talking to them next day, and them not being able to get out of bed because it just takes so much out of them. And one of the folks that we were hoping would come here for Sundance, he said, you know, he's Vietnamese, he said, I can't do it. It's too much. It just brings up too much, and it really takes it out of me. So, you know, I think it's still a very sensitive issue for so many people, and there was so much loss. And of course, you know, our story focuses on these heroic moments where we were able to save so many lives, but for all the lives that were saved, there were so many more losses, and it was in the context of a much larger tragedy that, you know, we participated in as a country. But I think also, you know, it raises a lot of questions that are relevant today, not only about when we are entering a war, thinking about the exit strategy as we go into one, but also thinking about all the people who are helping us on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, and from the translators to the cooks to the people who are collaborating with the CIA, and all of those people are then left vulnerable when we leave. And what is our responsibilities to them? What is our responsibilities to the country? I'm all for getting out of wars, generally speaking, but you look at this with a little bit of a closer eye, and I'm sure I would have been one of those people protesting on the streets to get out of Vietnam during that time, but then you see it from the perspective of the people we're leaving, and there are a lot of implications, and it's not as easy as just saying, we're not going to support this.
Well, it never is, because we're human beings, relationships are created, and what the bottom line is we take care of each other, and this is a beautiful story about people who actually did that at the risk of their own lives. Really looking forward to seeing it. Last Days in Vietnam, premiering here at the Sundance Film Festival, obviously showing throughout the week, and of course we'll have a long, long life after that. So thank you, Rory. Thank you, Kim, for being here. Good luck throughout the week. Get used to a lot of applause. It's going to happen. All right, we'll be back. We're going to show you the opening day press conference after this. Stay tuned for more In the Can.